The midwife's hands, slick with blood, moved frantically in a desperate attempt to save the life of the 13-year-old girl, writhing in pain on the straw-stuffed mattress. For endless hours, this child, and she was unmistakably still a child, had screamed as her small, underdeveloped body tried to carry out a task it was never meant for. The baby wouldn't come, and Margaret Buffett was dying. As a bitter wind howled through the towers of Pembroke Castle in the winter of 1457, everyone in that dimly lit room shared a terrible unspoken understanding this girl should never have been with child. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you the story that polite historians have buried for centuries. This isn't just another grim tale from medieval England. This is the raw, unvarnished truth about what happened when a 12-year-old girl was forced into marriage with a man old enough to be her father, a man who refused to wait. This is the story of how greed tore apart a child's body. I hope everyone helps me with a like and a subscription, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. How England's most powerful elite stood by in silence, and how that broken girl later became the most relentless woman in Tudor England. Everything you're about to hear is backed by eyewitness testimony, medical accounts, and a chilling confession given by Margaret's own priest after her death. But here's what's even more disturbing. Margaret Buffett's suffering wasn't an exception. It was a symptom of something far worse, a widespread pattern so horrific that even the midwife's hands, slick with blood, moved frantically in a desperate attempt to save the life of the 13-year-old girl, writhing in pain on the straw-stuffed mattress. For endless hours, this child, and she was unmistakably still a child, had screamed as her small, underdeveloped body tried to carry out a task it was never meant for. The baby wouldn't come, and Margaret Buffett was dying. As a bitter wind howled through the towers of Pembroke Castle in the winter of 1457, everyone in that dimly lit room shared a terrible, unspoken understanding this girl should never have been with child. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you the story that polite historians have buried for centuries. This isn't just another grim tale from medieval England. This is the raw, unvarnished truth about what happened when a 12-year-old girl was forced into marriage with a man old enough to be her father, a man who refused to wait. This is the story of how greed tore apart a child's body, how England's most powerful elites stood by in silence, and how that broken girl later became the most relentless woman in Tudor England. Everything you're about to hear is backed by eyewitness testimony, medical accounts, and a chilling confession given by Margaret's own priest after her death. But here's what's even more disturbing. Margaret's and Buffett's suffering wasn't an exception. It was a symptom of something far worse. A widespread pattern so horrific that even by medieval standards people knew it was wrong, and still they allowed it. Now imagine this. May 31st, 1443. In the stone-cold halls of Bleo Castle in Bedfordshire, a baby girl is born. Her name is Margaret. But to those around her, she's not a child, she's a transaction waiting to happen. Her father, John Boet, Duke of Somerset, is one of the most influential men in the realm. But within a year, his mysterious death sends ripples through the court. The whispers start immediately suicide. In medieval England, that wasn't just a tragedy, it was a spiritual scandal that tarnished the whole bloodline. Just like that baby, Margaret became vulnerable, and before she could even walk, the vultures began circling. Because this infant girl had just inherited a mountain of wealth, titles, estates, influence, all bundled into a radle-sized target. Her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, fought to protect her. She raised the child close, surrounded by half-siblings in what might have been a warm, stable home. She even taught her daughter to read and write in French, feeding her brilliant young mind. And for a brief moment, it looked like this story could turn out differently. But King Henry VI had other ideas. When Margaret was just 3 years old, the king handed her over like a diplomatic gift to William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk. And the Duke wasted no time. He did exactly what predators do. He married this toddler to his 7-year-old son John. That's right. A 3-year-old girl was turned into a bride. Let that settle in. This wasn't just history, it was a system designed to consume children like Margaret, and it was just getting started. Decades later, when her granddaughter, another Margaret Tudor, was promised to the King of Scotland while still a child, Margaret Beaufort fought back with everything she had. Alongside her daughter-in-law Elizabeth of York, she pleaded with Henry VII to delay the marriage. Her own son even recorded her words, "The Queen and my mother are very much against this marriage. They fear the King of Scots would not wait but injure her and endanger her health." Think about that. Half a century after her own ordeal, Margaret was still haunted by the trauma she endured. She knew exactly what it meant when a man would not wait. She understood not abstractly but physically and painfully what early consummation did to a girl's body because she had lived through it. And yet even with her warnings, even with her status and influence, the machinery of politics rolled forward. Young Margaret Tudor was sent to Scotland anyway, married at 13 just like her grandmother. The cycle repeated itself. This is why Margaret Beaufort's story is not just a footnote in history, it is a brutal lens into how medieval England operated, how girls were turned into bargaining chips, and how even those who had been victimized could end up reinforcing the very system that broke them. Margaret rose to unprecedented power for a woman of her time. She became the king's mother, the architect behind the rise of the Tudor dynasty. But she never left that cold, blood-soaked chamber in Pembroke Castle. She never bore another child, and when she tried to stop her granddaughter from facing the same fate, she couldn't. Some modern historians try to smooth over the sharp edges of her life. They speak of different times, different norms. They highlight that Margaret requested to be buried beside Edmund Tudor, the man who impregnated her at 12. But trauma is complicated. There was no vocabulary for Stockholm Syndrome in the 15th century, but the psychology behind it was already at work. When you are a child and the most powerful voices around you tell you this is holy, that this is duty, that this is love, you start to believe it. What happened to Margaret was not just cruel by modern standards, it was already viewed as shocking then. The accepted age for consummation in noble marriages was typically 14 or older. Many families even included clauses to delay it until the bride matured. Edmund Tudor's decision to ignore that his choice to impregnate a 12-year-old girl for the sake of money was horrifying even to his peers. But they let it happen, because to them Margaret wasn't a person. She was an asset, something to be handed over, used and profited from. The king who gave her away, the nobles who attended the wedding, the priests who blessed the bed, they all knew what would happen to her, and they allowed it. This is the foundation on which the Tudor legacy was built. The suffering of one child helped secure the English crown. Every Tudor monarch that followed Henry VIII with his 6 wives Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, they all owed their lineage to a girl who almost died giving birth at 13 because a grown man refused to wait 2 more years. Margaret survived. In many ways she triumphed. She helped found colleges at Cambridge Christ's College, and St John's College still bear her mark. She became a political force, a woman so influential she signed letters Margaret R, styling herself like a queen. But power doesn't erase pain. Legacy doesn't undo loss. When she died on June the 29th, 1509, just 5 days after her 66th birthday, Margaret Beaufort had outlived 4 husbands. She had seen her son crowned king and her grandson ascend to the throne. She had shaped English history but never again bore a child. Her body never recovered from what was done to her at 12, and this is the truth that gets buried beneath the pageantry of Tudor history. We remember Henry VIII's wives. We celebrate Elizabeth I's golden reign. We praise the Tudor Rose, the Reformation, the birth of modern England. But we forget the child whose body bore the cost of it all. We forget that the Tudor dynasty was built on the broken spine of a 13-year-old girl. Margaret's story is not just a medieval horror, it's a warning. In a world where child marriage still exists, where girls are still bought, sold and used, her life reminds us what happens when power is allowed to crush innocence. Margaret Beaufort survived, but no child should have to survive what she did. Yes, she rose, yes, she conquered, but at what cost? The midwife who delivered young Henry Tudor that bitter day in Pembroke Castle likely went home whispering prayers of gratitude, believing she'd witnessed a miracle. And in some sense she had. It was a miracle that Margaret survived the birth. A miracle that the baby did too, but it was a miracle born from tragedy, one that should never have been necessary. If even one adult in Margaret's life had chosen to protect her instead of using her, there would have been no miracle needed. They could have spared her that agony. They could have prevented it, but they didn't. Instead, they handed over her childhood, her body, her ability to ever bear another child, and placed it all on the altar of politics and male ambition. And that's why Margaret Beaufort's story demands to be told in its entirety. Not just the elegant portraits, not just the founding of a dynasty, but the truth that before she became the king's mother, she was a child brutalized by a system that saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. Until we face that truth, until we fully acknowledge the real human cost behind the stories of thrones and roses, of crowns and lineages, we risk repeating the same abuses under new names. Margaret tried to break the cycle. She tried to protect her granddaughter from the fate that had nearly destroyed her. But she couldn't. She failed not because she didn't fight, but because the machine she fought against was bigger than even the mother of a king. So maybe all we can do now is tell her story as it really happened. Maybe all we can do is refuse to look away. That's how we honor her, not just as the political genius, not just as the founder of colleges or mother of the Tudor line, but as the 12-year-old girl who should have been safe, who should have been protected, who should have been playing, not giving birth. She was 12, he was 24. That was wrong then. It is wrong now. And no amount of royal pageantry, no rose-bedecked propaganda can change that. Every time you see a portrait of Henry VIII, remember that he only existed because a child was forced into sex. Every time Elizabeth of Orleans is lauded for her brilliance, remember that her dynasty rose from a foundation soaked in a little girl's blood and pain. Every time someone glamorizes Tudor England, pause and remember Margaret Beaufort, 13 years old, screaming in agony, giving birth with a body that was never ready. That's the real price of empire. That's the human toll behind the splendor. That's the truth buried beneath the Tudor rose. It bloomed in blood, in suffering, in the sacrifice of a girl who should have had a life of her own, not one dictated by the ambitions of men. Margaret Beaufort died believing what happened to her was God's will. She died thinking it was fate. She died never hearing that she had been wronged, that she had always deserved better. But we know better now. We know what child abuse is, we know what consent is, and we know that what happened to her was not destiny, it was a crime. Margaret Beaufort was more than a matriarch. She was a survivor. She carried the scars of her abuse for life and still tried to stop it from happening again. She couldn't save her granddaughter. She couldn't stop the countless other girls who suffered like her. But maybe if we remember her story not as a fairy tale but as a warning, we can protect the next ones. Maybe her real legacy isn't a crown or a college or a royal bloodline. Maybe it's the lesson she left behind that when we fail to protect our children, we lose more than innocence. We lose our humanity. She was 12 years old. Never forget that. Behind the glitter of Tudor history, behind the ceremonies and triumphs, there is a girl who almost died because adults chose power over protection. That is the horror behind the Tudor rose. That is the blood that darkened the English throne. That is the price Margaret Beaufort paid for a dynasty she never asked for. She was 12. That alone should have been enough. Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.